Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 380, and I had a conversation with Jessica Hairston. Jessica is a former foster kid and adult adoptee who reunited with her birth family at the age of 19. She's a survivor, an exceptional writer. Her poetry collection, Power of Our Wombs, is a moving look at childhood, racial trauma, sexual trauma, mental health, creativity, and belonging. Even if you're not really into poetry, which I am very much into poetry, and I loved her collection. I dog-eared the book and put sticky notes all over it. It's so well done. But even if you're not into poetry, her story is really an incredible one. And I think that you will find something in there that you enjoy. Just FYI, though, there is a trigger warning on this episode for sexual assault and abuse. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your music. There's lots of records out there. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It's super helpful, and I really appreciate those rates and reviews. All right, thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be loved, and here we go. Jessica Hairston, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you for having me.
Shout out to Tony, who I adore and always sends amazing humans to talk with me. So thank you to Tony, too. Were you a student of his?
I was. Yeah. I graduated O'Dowd in 2016, Bishop O'Dowd. Had him freshman and I believe junior year. Took African American studies.
I wish I'd had a teacher like him when I went to school.
Yeah.
You wrote this book that you sent to me, thank you, Power of Our Wombs, and it is so like 1,000 so's good. It's so good.
Thank you.
It's there's so many feelings I've been feeling while reading it. I talked to my dad this morning, and he said, "Oh, who are you interviewing today?" And I said, "You," and I said the title of the book. And he said, "Oh, she must be a feminist." And I said, "What does that mean to you, Dad?" And it actually triggered this hour-long conversation about his understanding from his generation of what it means, and my generation, which is, I'm probably, I think, older than you, so, and your generation of what that word means. But I thought it was so interesting that he hears the word womb and he just puts it on mother or a woman. Instead of the idea that he too grew in a womb, that it's also a part of him and his experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, fascinating.
Yeah, no, exactly. Agreed. And I think also, we're in this age where we have these conversations about us as human beings possessing both feminine and, masculine energy. And I think the same goes, I'm reading a book, or I'm listening to an audiobook about trauma and specifically looking at like avoidant attachment styles. And it was just kind of talking about, I like the language that they use about systems. You have your sexual system, you have your caretaker, parental, system, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that human beings, we both have like a maternal aspect and a paternal aspect within us. So no, agreed that there is this instinct to sort of place it on the female experience only. Which is not the case.
Tell me about your childhood and how that shaped you.
So I'm 25. I was born in Oakland. I was born to drug-addicted parents. I was born addicted to crack. I think it's really interesting because as a child, or maybe more, I can't exactly remember the first time my mother, I think it might have been actually high school, that she allowed me to sort of look through like my adoption documentation and things of that nature. But it's interesting to actually sit and look at, sort of written in like medical jargon of like, okay, baby, it's going to have to go through withdrawal. First test run, my birth father Rest in peace to him. He passed away from AIDS. The last 10 years of his life, he kind of was afflicted with a lot of complication related things due to, compromised situation. So just immediately coming into the world, there's these, I'm another one of those children that has all these, tubes connected to them, taking medications, being checked for HIV. What else I learned in the documentation was that I actually had or at the time, when I was around like 14, this is when I did for sure realize that I had at least one sibling, because the paperwork was kind of talking about like, the courts found another child by the birth mom, 12 years older, had been living with her for like 2 or 3 years in the beginning, and then was placed into foster care as a result of the drug abuse. And so in that first poem, Ours Minds, in the book, I talk about so once I reunited with my birth siblings, my parents have both passed, but when I reunited with my birth siblings, 2019 or 2018, and I was like 19 or so, something like that. I reunited, and that's when, in talking to my mother's first daughter, that's when I learned, and she's actually the first sibling I met, surprisingly, because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to meet this child. Like, it's just referred to as minor, and her identity was protected. It's a 12-year gap, so I'm like, she could kind of be anywhere at this point. So in speaking with her, she's like, my mother, she was already fairly addicted. She probably had started her addiction in her teen years. And then by the time my sister was born, around, she was about 20 or 21, she had her. She, sold her, she needed drugs and straight gave her to the drug dealer as payment. And we don't exactly know how long my sister was with him, but over at least a week, maybe longer. And no one came looking for her until family members came over and were like, so where's your daughter? What's going on? Even within that, my sister was like cooking for herself at 2 years old, trying to move around the kitchen and boil water by herself. And so she even has this massive burn on her hand. She said, and it wasn't until she was about 18 or 19 going to get her first job, having to go up to like Sacramento, I think, and get her official birth record outside of her like foster care paperwork and all these things. And that's where the foster worker was like, I can't really tell you this, but I'm gonna just tell you now, or I'm gonna just kind of slip it in. Like, I think we do know what happened to your hand, and kind of do know why you ended up in foster care. So that was her first time learning about her own story as well. But it was just this really profound experience of like, hey, can I ask you about this? Like, I have this, it's interesting how it's kind of written in a sort of very formal, technical language. Like, is there a way that I kind of wanted the story to be humanized, and I wanted to hear it from my sister's point of view instead of just what's real basically written up in this paperwork? It was just so interesting to hear that, get that filled in from my sister. And then she was like, can you please send me the paperwork? I know it's yours, but it's a form of healing for her as well. I think I went to like a sort of private preschool kindergarten. That was, I don't know if you know much about Oakland. So this would have been maybe 2001, maybe to 2003 or 4. I don't know, just giving context of the urban area. This school was located on the water, kind of by before Jack London, like once you get off 880 under the freeway, kind of on the water. It's interesting. I'm reading a book right now called, you might have heard about it or not, The Writers Come Out at Night. It's about like police corruption, cover-ups in Oakland. There's this restaurant that I used to eat at during that time called Buttercup. And it was right across the street from my school, but it pops up in this book as a place where OPD goes to often, and they'll go do something really, horrific, and then go meet as a group and like eat lunch at the Buttercup during the early 2000 to 2004. So it was very interesting to sort of see that pop up. Buttercup's such a random place. It's mostly just warehouses over there, or at least it was at the time. So it honestly just made sense because of, OPD loves, like many of these type of police departments, they love finding abandoned areas and taking people over there and abusing people and things like that. So it's just interesting that way, how urban development plays a part in kind of empowering militarization and police misconduct. And then I went to a public public elementary school up on 98th past the zoo called Grass Valley Elementary School. Grass Valley has been in the news kind of lately, as of maybe like 2018. The mayor, I think it was Libby at the time, Libby Schaff, kind of, and city council of Oakland had all of these directives with the school board to close like up to about 11 schools or more throughout Oakland, and it's kind of been litigating and going forward since 2018. But I remember in 2018, a lot of students kind of left school, doing a lot of walkouts, doing a lot of protests. And a lot of other schools in Oakland were just like slated to close, which are mostly schools in West Oakland and maybe downtown or West Oakland, but, you know, strategically missing areas that are serving white students. Literally like this spring or the end of 2022, they announced that they weren't going to close the schools. Like all of the protesting, they occupied Parker Elementary to try to prevent the closure of all of these schools. And so it's been like six or so years of hard work to prevent that. And so it's really interesting to actually see that come through. Currently, I'm a student, creative writing major, I may be dropping out at the moment, but I was studying at Mills College in Oakland, which is now known as Northeastern University, starting July 2022. And the campus actually has a middle school and a elementary school. So my middle school is on the campus. It's called Julia Morgan School for Girls. So, you know, in my class, we probably had about three or four Black students total. And in the beginning, you know, things were great. They liked having a diverse background of students, so to speak. I mean, it's not that diverse, but it was diverse for a school like that. And then I kind of was just like, you know, but if your daughter has any troubles, any social troubles, any academic troubles, any troubles outside of school that trickle in, unfortunately, or, because I remember when I was going there, one thing they used to always say was, when you come to school, you know, you have to leave your problems at the door. Like your problems are not allowed to come in the classroom. This is, you know, we want a distraction-free environment. Like they would say this to us. So I was like, well, I don't think that's how that works, but we'll see. You know, it ended pretty painfully for me. And I was like, honestly, I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't send my children there, just because of how horribly the administration handled issues. And, you know, the equity in supporting students was just not there. There was a ton of support for the white kids that come from the Oakland Hills and the Berkeley Hills, and like nothing really for anyone else.
Were you going in and out of foster care this whole time? Did you get adopted early on?
I was in foster care for about 10 months, and I first started my placement at 10 months with my mom, and would go home with her frequently for about 3 months, and then had full-time placement, and it takes about another 2 years for the adoption to be finalized. I think my biggest my biggest takeaway from that is, you know, as we were just talking about, like avoidant attachment, there is definitely, I just learned about this term called relinquishment trauma, which is something that adopted children feel is you sort of have to, you know, in matriculating into your new family, there's this relinquishment period that you go through where your adopted family kind of asks you to focus just on them and kind of let go of the past that you've just come from. And so I can definitely say that it's something that I experienced in our relationship with my mom, and is something that definitely eroded, because there was, particularly with my mom, who also I would say has an avoidant attachment style, there's just this need to sort of avoid anything that is unsettling and uncomfortable. And so, you know, that's part of wrapped up in my identity issues with my names and stuff like that, because even though Jessica is the person that I have been the longest in my life, Kamani is someone very early on that I had the original trauma of the way that I came into the world. And then the second trauma of having a family that asked me to sort of leave that part of myself behind and not let that be someone that I can continue to identify as.
That's your birth name?
Yeah, my birth name. Kamani. You know, when I was 7, the wound was additionally reopened in us adopting a child, or trying to adopt a child again. She was about 2 and I was about 7. Quick side note, you know, it's really interesting because I actually remember my mom kind of sitting me down and was like, what do you think about having a sibling? And it kind of, the conversation was followed up with her. Like she put out a whole folder, and like, it really was sort of like, you have these pictures of children printed out, or at least she did. I don't know.
It's like a Sears catalog of children.
Yeah. And, because I think something similar happens like with surrogacy and with open adoptions, where you kind of can be presented with the family that you want to adopt a child from, where you can kind of like look through and meet the family. I know that's a story that happens as well.
Well, I think adoption is big business. I don't know that people understand that there's a lot of money to be made in the baby getting market. And so when I see things like abortion rights being taken away, which will more impact lesser advantaged economic peoples, then all these babies that will be born as a result, well, yeah, it makes sense that the people who make money off of babies want to make sure the people that don't have money, so that when they have babies, they give them up, that process keeps going.
Agreed. Again, about the economics, they tried a similar thing in the 80s and 90s where, there was this real push in hospitals to, and I kind of state this in the book, but it really was this, of really targeting Black mothers in labor and forcibly testing them to make sure that they could find something on you, that you are addicted or anything that stands out. So white mothers use much drugs, but they were never tested and their children were not taken from them. So there really was a push to keep a system going and keep making money off of newborn children. And there's a world that foster children, essentially, as they, if they age in the system, that they play in the workforce, in the, incarceration force, and all of that. So we have this short force of people who will always be in that world, keeping cots open.
You adopted into a white family or a Black family?
My mom is Black. It's a Black family. And I just actually started learning about the Hairstons, which is their father's side of the family. So it was a book written on them. The Hairstons, which is Scottish, made their money off of slavery. So I would say that I'm still learning, like having a parent that's fairly avoidant attached. It's hard to learn about their life and the where they come from, which is also something that kind of made it difficult for me to fully, settle in the family as a kid and understand who I'm quote unquote related to or living with or being reared by. The Hairstons, like my mother's father's family, were pretty bougie, I would say. In the historical context, they, were definitely some of the first to be able to go to a historically Black college. So there was sort of a little bit of an elitist mindset that sort of divided the family. Once they got a little bit older, the father had become estranged from the family, moved to a whole different state. And so, even within the book, right, like I talk about mother wounds and I talk about, the history of mother figures that I've had, like even as far as dance teachers and stuff like that. But I don't talk much about my adopted mom, mostly particularly because, and I feel kind of like I did a little bit of a disservice. Like I talked all this stuff about what the book is about and blah, 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 but it's missing a large element of the person who actually raised me. And it's just because we are strategically at odds about being open and vocal about my life as it pertains to her and her life and just any kind of lineage that just connects her at all. So the last poem of the book is sort of dedicated to my mom. It's more of a love poem. I actually gave it as a Mother's Day gift. Communicating is a struggle between us. And so sometimes that's one way that I use writing where I'm like, it's hard for me. It's hard to talk about hard things and it's hard to express intimacy as well and feelings of love. So I wrote it to her. I wrote love to her through a poem. This is the thing about mothers at the very end, towards the end. But I hope in the second version of my book, I'm probably going to make it longer. It'll have essays and prose writing and things of that nature. Maybe even a little bit more research. It'll be probably twice the length. Maybe come out sometime next year.
Have you reunited with your other siblings besides the eldest?
Yes, my father's first two kids are in their early 30s. My sister is in her late 30s on my mother's side. So my father's two kids, they all basically, like, my sister lives in Pinole, which is Marin County. It's about 40 minutes from the heart of the Bay. My father's kids my sister lives just moved to Las Vegas, but she was living up in Roseville past Sacramento. My brother was living in Stockton. And I have two younger siblings. So I have a younger sister will be 21 in October.
When you have a trauma from the get-go, we could argue that being born is traumatic enough, but then you've got this other stuff compiled on top of that. And then you get into the foster, and then you get adopted. At every turn, you're told an identity. Right now, you're a crack-addicted baby. That's your first identity. Now you're a foster kid. Now you're a survivor of abuse. Now you're an adopted person. Now here's your records. And they tell you this whole other story. And now you're going to a school that says you're not allowed to have feelings about anything. I mean, and then you meet siblings who are then giving you this whole other identity. I personally, for me, named Susan. I don't think my parents got my name right. I don't know what my name is, but I know it's not that. I don't know what it is. I know it's not that. Yeah. But how do all those hugely defining moments in your life, how do you find who you are? I mean, you're a soul, if you believe in a soul, in a whatever this is. Yeah. and that operates in its own existence too.
Yeah.
It's a big question. It's a big question, but I am curious.
Childhood was definitely hard. It was hard for me to figure out who I am and work with all of these stories and these narratives in my life. Like you said, just because especially with not having space and real freedom or support to do that. It's hard to grow up when you're like 3 or 4, right? You still barely have a conscious memory, but you have an overload of feelings and emotions already sitting in your body, particularly around like inconsistency and attachment and trust. And then you become this adopted child. And, I say in a poem, there's this urge or this, and I mean, I'm so young, it's hard to say that I was like, someone sat me down and was like, you have to be this and that as an adopted child. This is a woman who is, yearning for a daughter to do the maternal experience. There's something here that needs to be fulfilled because, I think also within the placement system, there's this divide between how we understand foster kids and adopted kids. And so foster kids is like, just give them a home, just give them supervision. We won't worry about the rest. Just get them, with adopted children, it's like, okay, life is great now. You've been adopted. Like, yay, you're normal again. It's like, that is not, neither of those narratives are true or fully, correct, and really leave kids and the families, foster families, adopted families, without a real understanding of reality and the support needed for those realities. And so to be 3 or 4 and you have these things, swirling around in your body, memories, feelings, all of these things, there's this desire on my part to be able to better communicate with my mom because I could see that bonding was a struggle. And I think it's interesting because some of my later paperwork say things like, the child is progressing well, she's smiling, she appears to be happy. But that is not really the narrative that's fully true. And even if you can catch my mom in a moment where she might slip up and say something that is not what she really wants to come out, doesn't, so, she'll say things like, you cried a lot. You cried a lot. You didn't have your first smile until you were like almost 2.5. Because smiling is one of those things that I've learned as far as child development is something that you get from imitation. And when you don't have consistent adult in your life, it takes a long time to gain those things. And so even when I was a kid, my mom would say things like, you were fine. Like, you were not abused. But then we'll say things like, but, when I got you, like, you were clearly underdeveloped, like you couldn't speak, you weren't babbling, you weren't crawling, you couldn't lift your own neck. were lighter. You had the bald patch in the back, which is not unusual for babies, right? But some people do say that it could be an indication of a child that's just been laying in a crib without much uptime. And so I think it's interesting because then as I got a little older and I was with my mom and I was starting to be socialized in the daycares, and then I was like, would not sleep. And I've essentially had insomnia most of my, I've never really been a good sleeper.
Well, with all that childhood trauma, I would imagine it would develop a sense of sleeping with one eye open. So you never really get fully rested.
Right. And so I had this nickname as a child of being observant and being an observer. And so I'd be at daycare and they'd like, lay down, go to sleep. Just 5 minutes, go to sleep. And I'd be like, no, I am up, I am watching, I am not going to sleep. And so I think it's interesting that my mom is able to see the connection there. But in your first year, I think it's scary to even get the idea that, because my mom was definitely there was probably at least 10 kids in the group home that you were in. It was very busy. It's not so much judgment. I mean, I'm not trying to take care of 10 kids. It's a lot, especially if you don't know them very well and in and out, whatever. But it goes in line with the feelings I have of there's a lack of trust. And it's so deeply innate. I'm having a hard time even fighting it. And it's something that I've had to go and do research on with adopted kids. Of I've talked to adoptees who are I was basically placed with a family at 3 days and was never really able to emotionally recover. I was addicted very young, in and out the house, never really bonded well with the adopted parents. And they take that very personally. I mean, it's hard after you think, okay, well, it's just a phase. It'll by middle school, by high school, maybe by the beginning of college, they'll start finding themselves and they'll come back. And it doesn't usually work that way. A lot of times, if nothing else, it tends to heal itself possibly when that adopted child starts to have kids themselves. That's what I see most in blogs and people talking about their own personal experience. But I didn't know that there were so many adoptees who are in their 30s and they're I don't know when I'm going to be able to, connect with my adopted parents. And these are the people I've been with for 30 years or whatever. It's validating, but it's scary because it's not a place that you want to be when you're people are telling you, well, this is you've got a beautiful family. Lucky you, chip on your shoulder, blah, blah, blah. And I'm I've been working really hard to solve intimacy and attachment issues in my relationship with my mom because she was so insistent on, you were not abused. Let's not talk about this. You've got a new family. Let's move forward. Your name is Jessica. Everything's fine. We're great. We're good. And now you put me in therapy at 6 years old. And now I'm 25 and we still don't have a relationship. And if we just allowed me to be me in the beginning, really, maybe we wouldn't be here as much to the degree we are as almost estranged. It's really heartbreaking. It really is.
That's a lot of expectation on a child, first of all. And secondly, it's not about the adoptive parents. It should be about, in my humble opinion, should be about the children. So any adoptive parent providing a stable, that's the baseline. Yes, a healthy, nurturing, loving, that's the fucking baseline. So it's not a superhero thing. You're not saving the world. That's the least you can do, honestly, is providing warmth and love and shelter and food. And really, in my humble opinion, again, I don't know because I'm not adopted, but it's to expect a child to somehow magically be oh, here we are. Everything's great now. Even at a young age, I've read a lot about adoptive and IVF kids who grow up with this innate sense, deep sense of there's something missing. It's either, or there's an abandonment that is so deep.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about generational trauma as well in your book, and the idea of how far back have we been abandoned? How far back does it go? There's this, I'm right here, really from the beginning of the book, it grabbed me. And this line you say, and I still keep my hands up to shield my face to prevent any new loving that won't stay, that I don't have the power to keep. So powerful. I mean, it just gives me shivers.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting you picked that out. That's, I don't mean that lightly. Yeah, that is another one of the trauma responses that I had as a kid, was to be highly defensive. And I'd have these defensive postures that became habits or normal. So like when I say like I would rub my, like it was when you spend this much time in the crib like this, and then eventually you just start, and then I would just kind of keep my face, and it's kind of like a stem in a way, where it's like a thing that I do to comfort myself. And so I have this, it's weird, I'm being honest, but I have this.
No, but really quick, I just want to say for those that, because this is a listening show, she put her hands up over her face. So that's just so, yeah.
So I have this sort of, one way that I kind of regulate myself is by rubbing fabric. So that's blankets, pillows, comforters, and clothing. And so my thing wasn't really sucking my thumb, but it was kind of holding these items to myself that I considered mine. And that's, people say, kids that are very stingy, but it's not protective of your space, protective of your belongings. It's an only child thing, but I think mine's even started before that, and so I kind of make that parallel in another poem about the girl that we adopted. I wish I could remember her birth name, but I'll just refer to her as Ricky. I do remember her being like, it was very difficult, we're going to grab her bag, her backpack, put something in it, take something out, and that would be a meltdown. Like, don't touch my stuff, don't touch my clothes, don't touch me. Yeah, very, very deep abandonment. And, as far as how far back does the trauma go, and also to sort of answer your other question, I think that, reuniting my birth siblings, particularly my sister, Kanisha, she lives in Las Vegas. I believe we're 9 years apart. She has a 10-year-old son, Micah. She has been one of the biggest and strongest reconnecting, sort of filling a void within me. Not to use her sort of as like a void filler. That's not the goal, but it has definitely, like, people kind of warn you often as a young child in the placement system of like, you could meet them, you can meet your birth family all you want, and they probably won't be the people, like they won't be anything for you. They're just going to let you down. You can get your heart broken, you get used, whatever. And it's been quite opposite. In fact, I've felt stronger and have received stronger support and sense of familial support than I have in most of my life from my adopted family. And that is not to say that they are horrible people or anything like that, but there's a sense of activeness that comes with being in your community that they were not in a lot of ways, I would say. And, just immediately, like my sister's like, okay, first of all, if you ever need living space and you need to get out of your home, like, just come. I'll give you a couch, half a bed, floor, whatever you need. You can stay as long as you want. And this is someone who's, had her struggles with employment and just the same things as most of us in this world. But there's no question about it. And she would still be supportive of me and allow me to be myself. I would not have to shrink myself. And my sister was in Las Vegas, is already immediately like, as soon as you graduate, come down, stay with us, stay here, get yourself off the ground, do whatever you need. We're here to support you. Of course, we want to see you and have you around. The distance is far. So it just, in 6 years, it's really been the most healing thing. And I spent a lot of time as a child, like literally praying. Like I would just get to the end of my bed, I would open my blinds, see the stars, and I don't know if this is really doing anything, and I'm not very religious, but I'm going to give it a go. This is the thing that I want most of my life. At that time, I didn't even know if I had any siblings. I'm like, everyone could be dead, there could be no one left, but I'm just going to pray anyway. Sidebar, but I think it's special that I met them through Ancestry.com. I'm just going to search for my own DNA, countries and things of that nature, and contacted by cousins. On Ancestry, you see a lot of a long list of, this could be a cousin, this could be whatever.
Yeah.
And so this specific woman was like, no, I'm going to talk to you. And my last name, my father's last name was not in my profile, so I'm like, out of all the people on hers, how did she know? I think she might have actually just been reaching out to everyone, but very quickly she was like, your father and me are first cousins. His mom and my mom are sisters. that your father is my cousin. We grew up together. And I was like, whoa, okay. Well, look at that. And it was hard because, so my mom told me about my parents' situation and the age specifically and all of this when I was about 14, which opened up a real wound of like time, and so that's another thing. And I learned about this term called queer time, which in queer studies is kind of talking about the AIDS epidemic and how it puts an entire population of people in this place of, I need to live my life right now because I'm not going to have it very soon. And so I think that sort of did the same kind of fire within me of like, I went crazy and I was researching everything about AIDS treatment, medical neglect, and what are the odds if you're poor, if you're on the streets, if you're on drugs. It's been 20 years of living this way. Like, what are the chances that these people would still be alive? And I got very committed to the journey of like putting my name in Facebook and putting it in different orders and things like that, putting in Google, just seeing if anything pops up. Got nothing. But my late teenage years into going into college were heavily focused on how can I get to meet them as soon as possible. But I knew that I didn't know how that would make that work. I mean, technically, I'm in a closed adoption. By law, they're protected from me as well. And they're allowed to, uphold that protection if they wanted, if they were still around. And so my senior year, my birth mother passed in February. And then I turned 18 in June. And then my birth father passed when I was 10, though. And then about a year later, I was able to start connecting with my birth siblings from Ancestry. But I remember at 18, I asked my mom again, I said, okay, can you try? And she was like, no, you need to just focus on school. You're not ready. This is going to be a distraction for you. This is going to take you off your path. It definitely broke, that's just another complex trauma on top of within our relationship there. But there's just this sort of like need to sort of protect me from harsh realities, which was like not really for my protection. It was mostly for hers. And so it's been hard being reconnected with my birth siblings with our relationship because there's this like inability to sort of do much with the information. I say, hey, I've met so-and-so, or I want to, after a year or two of knowing them, I'm like, oh, it's her birthday, or she invited me to do this, or, my niece and nephew that. And, like we can't have a conversation about it. My mom emotionally shuts down anytime we try to really talk much about my birth siblings or my birth family. And so it's like the best thing that's ever happened to me, one of the best things that ever happened to me. And I can barely share it with her. And so that's hard as well. And so I know that there is this, the reality that the narrative she keeps trying to sell me on from childhood is not substantive.
I hope you all find your way back to each other, but you may not in this lifetime. And, you have to, it has to be for you. You know what I mean? That's the thing. It has to be for you, because the truth of the matter is we are all alone. And it's sad to say that. And I think a lot of people are like, no, I've got plenty of people. But do you?
Yeah.
None of us really do that saying that we come into the world alone, we leave the world alone.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in life, there are moments we give so much of ourselves up to another, the dominion of ourselves, our mind, our heart, our soul, like all our bodies, whether we wanted to or not.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's to be a whole person on this planet is probably close to insurmountable, because we spend our whole life digging at little pieces of ourselves and handing them off, or people have spoons and they're carving at our very nature.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, may I read another little section? I want you to read one of your poems too. I'm going to read another section. This one really hit me too. Some say the mark between my eyes, the only one I was born with. But what about these new marks? Moles? Random scars? I wonder, stare them down, run my fingers over them. Maybe they aren't beauty marks, but in fact, entrance sites from others' demons, low-frequency spirits, traveling trauma. Fuck, so good. It's so good. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I feel that so much. I feel it so much. And it's so beautifully and tragically said, entrance sites from others' demons. But that's that thing of little carvings, little by little.
Yes. Ooh, yes. That's a great connection.
You know?
Mm-hmm. And I think, that's the one thing I love about poetry is that I could be so literal and metaphorical, and it's both the same. Pain is pain, violation is violation. The sort of relinquishing your part of yourself, whether it's, like you said, something you want to do or not, there is this sort of carving of ourselves over time. And I think that it's even interesting as we sort of, the more that I understand about the universe, at least from a scientific point of view. I've been watching a lot of stuff on YouTube just to sort of understand space and things. But we come in this world alone, and we leave alone. But I think that there's the part of life where we actually get to have this very beautiful, unparalleled experience that as just matter, as just atoms in the universe. It's really a blessing that you here were made this way, at this time, to spend it with these people on this earth. We get the opportunity to be in community with each other, to experience something other than many atoms in time and space, and have such complex language that is not able to be disconnected from emotions. And that's even down to dance and music and other types of language. I feel like our human experience is so, it's just the beauty of the soul and the body. We have both the human experience and the spiritual experience as well. Even when we're alone, we're all having a very spiritual experience, albeit painful or liberating, and sort of like nirvana or not. There's a connectivity that we all get to be aware of or to accept about that. And even on the flip side, on the painful side, when you have these traumatic experiences, in some ways you think, or you're at a period of your grieving or a period of your mourning of your past self and the new self after this trauma, where you're sitting and you're like, how long do I have to be connected to this person that I shared this experience with? It's something that my friends and I talk about a lot with their trauma, particularly with sexual trauma. It's like, how can I sever this connection between me and the person that abused me, or me and the person that betrayed me? And I appreciate that this poem for the opportunity to sort of focus on, all parties involved in this experience as well. And talk about like with my mom's relationship, or the relationship with my mom, she, to be sort of a single mom raising me. So I have no father. My mother is single, or, hasn't had a relationship mostly in my life. I think she was in a relationship with a man until I was about 2 or 3. And then he decided to go back to his wife. He was supposed to be separated and getting a divorce from, but he changed his mind. And so I think, sidebar, of there's some heartbreak there from a mom that has something that she wasn't able to let go of. And I also wonder a bit about like my mom's mom, and like hoarding and compulsive keeping, compulsive shopping, things of that nature. So there's this like need to like control reality, or control the past, control the future. And but anyway, so my mom is raising me. I'm going to school, and she works late. We live far. Like, I'm going to school. Like this. So in this story, the context is that I'm at Beacon, which is a school in the waterfront. And towards the end of it, we moved all the way back to East Oakland to 105th. So it's a far distance. And so we needed help with like someone to look after me after school. And so she would just go and seek out parents that she felt like she would be comfortable with me being with, even if we didn't have much of a friendship as like kids that go to school together. But that's not necessarily normal. But I think with this scenario, not to explain the poem, but there was this sort of need to override like unfavorable experiences for the sake of, well, we just need child placement. So you kind of need to figure things out. And that was a reoccurring theme in my life, where if I was spending a lot of time with friends because I didn't have anyone else to stay with at the time, something would happen and I would open up to her about it and kind of be like, I don't know what you want me to do. You just need to be somewhere with someone. And which was a letdown. And there a lot of times she would make friends with the families, and I would have these sort of, we're friendly because you're nice and I'm nice, and I was raised to sort of respect your space and be thankful that someone welcomed me into your home. So I would always come with that sort of energy. But as soon as I felt disrespected, things that I think would be disrespectful to my mom, she would like not handle in a way that protected me or her, in my opinion. You know, I had this experience where I was with this girl. We spent afternoons together into the evening, and I don't 100% know what was going on with her, but she was also an adopted child as well. And so she had her own experiences at play here. And she was being raised by a white family. So I can imagine there might be a lot of missing of details as well, possibly in her needs and her requirements for, you know, emotional support. Even with this book about trauma and avoidant attachment, I think is really interesting. My mom does the same things of, you know, when you have an experience, right? Because people say, you know, you go through life and you experience life in your body and your mind makes sense of it, right? Like, let's in this sort of move to get people to be in their bodies again. And so many of us live in a dissociated state. And so just in general, I spent most of my time, you know, that's another, you know, aspect of being born in a state of survival, or you already learn how to sort of leave your own body. And so it was easy for me to sort of block out stimuli that changed the narrative of my reality that I wasn't ready to handle. But that's kind of something you hope your parents can guide you with. But you know, my mom spent a lot of time in my childhood kind of telling people like, no, things were great. She loves me. We have a happy, loving family. There's no problems. We have no problems. Everything's fine. And that's how she likes to remember it. And so in some way, I processed this experience starting around 4. So this is going to be one of my first experiences where I have a conscious memory. And this went on for a while, like maybe 6 months to a year. I had these experiences with this girl. We spent so much of our free time being sexual with each other in like very advanced ways. When, you know, the girl already, she, you know, she was doing a lot of role play and kind of acting out things that she's seen or had acted out on her. And so it was very advanced, and it wasn't like this kind of cute curiosity of like before. And human beings are sexual beings. We have that start very early anyway, but it was this sort of shame that came over me of like, if my mother found out how much we were doing, it would be disgraceful. And on top of that, I'm in this home with a child who has white parents. I could be seen as someone of enabling, empowering, like, quote unquote, inappropriate behavior. And so there was this fear that came over me for a long time of this dread of like, coming to her house, having to continue being her friend, not feeling like I could say anything about this because it would not, like, my mother would only hear my participation, you know? But I definitely think that contributed to my intimacy problems. Probably around like 5 and 6, I started wetting the bed again. I couldn't, like, there was this added level of like rejecting my mother. Please don't touch me. I can't sleep in the dark anymore. I can't, like, being like, you know, under covers, you know, feelings of entrapment. So this is part of what sent me to therapy at 6. But by that point, I had kind of, like, you know, gotten rid of the memory or suppressed it so deep. My therapist was like, well, it's going to be a while before we know what's up with your child. So good luck. we really didn't get much from the therapy. Even with my mental health, there's this sort of recurring thing in my life where, like, yes, there is trauma and yes, there is this, but I thoroughly believe that with being able to speak about the things that you've been through, I definitely, you know, I was reading this conversation online about how many parents work so hard to get their children, you know, diagnosed with different kinds of disorders and things of that nature, as long as it proves that the parent is not at fault for some kind of neglect.
Right.
So I definitely think that
I think that sums it up.
Unfortunately. So there's this overhaul in my head to sort of like, I've got to get my stuff out of my head and on page, and then transmute that back into my body, where I've now reintegrated my experiences as not being something that's third party or separated from me, or I have to leave my body and then go look at myself to just see what it was or whatever. There's this desire to reintegrate my experiences and not have all of this separation and dissociation. But yeah, I spent a long time of my later years being like, no, like I wanted that and I enjoyed it, and I was just one of those fast children. I'm just a fast child. Like I was on top of it. I was into it so young, like yay me or whatever. But I always knew deep down like that's not really what was going on, and it was a lot more painful and overwhelming, and I had to be this child that doesn't make mistakes, and so making this mistake, her mother found out, ended the friendship. It's like, you have to go. And then I got home, my mom's like, you're disgusting. Like, you're nasty, you're disgusting. I don't know why you would do that. She just had a lot of things, and I barely remember that. I remember a lot of words being hurled at me. She didn't ask me once how we ended up in this situation or anything, and how I really felt about it. And that definitely seeped into our relationship as well. And there's a theme throughout where I do anything that doesn't align with her reality, and I'm like, it's a character flaw within me, which is really overwhelming versus it being like an opportunity to just grow and learn and things of that nature. It's this,
or to even protect you from it, which is another thing. Would you like to read one of your poems?
Sure. Do you have a vibe or?
I mean, I've highlighted and it's real good. The whole thing is so freaking good, and it's funny because in the beginning, there's a comment about read it in any direction, in any way, and however you feel moved. And
yeah,
I mean, as I'm reading it, I have mother wounds for sure. As I read it, or I just have life wounds, like every one of us. I find myself rereading and replaying it, and then feeling it where it is in my body that I feel the words. It's very powerful. It's very, very powerful. But yeah, please.
I'll read Stack of Papers. Are you okay with that?
And just to let everyone know, again, it's called Power of Our Wombs. WOMBS.
Stack of Papers, that was really one of my favorite ones to write. I actually, so I want to say it was either fall 2021 or like December or maybe January 2022, right before I turned the book into Nomadic Press Publishing to have them read it and let me know if they would accept it. And I had gone to a virtual, shout out to the pandemic, but I went to a virtual wound healing workshop class with a doula from Oakland, and it was, I was like, I'm just gonna give this a shot. I found so many things on Eventbrite of related to wound healing, and I wanted to just see in community talking about anything related to these topics, what might come from it in my writing and all of that. And so she gave us a prompt quite literally, and I'm always love the way that things just kind of come out of my head. People ask me that a lot, or how did you come from this prompt and then it turned into this whole thing? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. But it's a pretty amazing process. So just even the process of my writing is one of my favorite things. And just a shout out, I love that the book was able to take graphics. So one of my favorite things is the womb word dump, which I actually made on Canva or something. So I give you the words, and then I give you background, and then I give you the poem, and I just love that. But Juju the doula hosted me and some other Black women in her Heal the Womb virtual poetry class, because we're 2 years and some change into a world pandemic. It was 6 p.m. on a Friday night. There were several of us from the Bay Area because Juju the doula is from Oakland, and we're tuned in on time as she asked of us. Some even matriculated in as far as Georgia, Kentucky, and Virginia. We started with a womb word dump, and she posed us these two questions. What are your wombs like? If you could say it was an object, what would it be? To which I say, stack of papers. Stack of papers. My womb is a stack of papers from the state. I only know myself in the words I read on these pages, printed and published in 2003, when the social worker ceased visits, last report saying I hit the basics. She no longer needed to think of me till as early as 1998. Like how one is conditioned to learn oneself early on in report cards based on prison records of things white people say or were saying about you. My understanding literally jumped up and walked right off the page. I envy people who can raise their hands in class because their hands deserve to be up. I worry if I don't speak, I look like I don't deserve a seat. Pat themselves on the back and feel surrounded. Seems like the things my hands are best at is gripping my hip bones, kneading nape of my spine, and then diagnosing my womb pain as having traveled from my pelvis to my lower back, leaving a permanent ache. People have been telling me long as I can remember, I got the arch of a young mom, like I've been carrying myself since birth. Once we tested positive and they called my mother unfit, sent me on my lonesome way, away from source, from mother, from womb mama and mama's womb, from her bosoms, from her inner elbow where my head meant to lay, from my birth name. I'm always searching for my other homes, always thinking I'm missing someone. Every so often I crack open my papers to jog my memory, to hear my mother's voice, to recognize the sound of my cries, my loneliness, recognize my mother's eyes speaking back at me from between the lines. I wonder if I apologize for her indiscretions, will they reveal the rest of myself to me? But I also curse her father for breaking lines. His touch sent her to the streets, late teens trying to snatch her knowing back, bending her spine, pushing her hips out and back, hoping sex by way of the block might ground her into a happy home. And I must also curse the state for pretending like they don't know. Crack was her way of holding on, a gamble, resilience, to which card she pulls first, freedom or death. In Black Girl Call Home, Jasmine Mann wrote, mortality and magic occupied the same space, and she pulled death. I sometimes wish we hadn't cremated my mother so I could visit her in the yard, so we could have our own conversations by cloak of privacy. But she is amongst her scorned memories, regrets, mistakes, in my sister's home at the behest of all of those ears. They feel mostly judgment for her, understandably so. My womb has a moderately thick file of papers on her from clinics. Tested positive for cocaine, tested twice, 6 months apart, HIV, morbid cramps, collapse in shower, low blood pressure, needs birth control, never used, too scared, and even thicker file, post-assault, police riot, and leave offering nothing. After another assault, needs pregnancy tests, needs UTI tests, and sleeping pills. My womb with every interaction and non-interaction becomes more of a mystery to me. I guess she is love. I've discovered her to be potent power. She got me wet at fear hour to ease the pain, and I'm grateful. The most feminine part of me must have some hair. The masculine in me wants to keep it long. If my body could rise up and out like dough to make space for all this trauma, then I can believe my womb and my girl will in fact one day be able to stretch wide again, welcome love, endure the trauma of birth, a beauty that will not be denied. This is a story that matters.
That's so powerful. It's exceptional.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so beautiful and so tragic, and which is as human as it gets.
Yeah.
You know?
Powerful.
There's another one in Mama's Boy that you have here that it's funny. It's again beautiful and horrible and in the best way. Obviously, you know what I mean by that as a word person. What struck me in that poem was the idea that the abuser, the male abuser, who both is desperately trying to get back to the womb, all the while ripping it to shreds.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, and it's interesting because so my sophomore year of Riverside, I went to UC Riverside, and you know, that whole time, 2 years there, I like the Greek life on that campus was insane. Look, most Greek life in most campuses, but there it was frustrating to go somewhere, like especially after, right, like being a part of BSU at O'Dowd, having Mr. Green, like that's a very special community that we even most BSUs things of that nature don't have. And so I got to Riverside and was like super amped up. I just just really enjoyed my senior year, being able to be involved with BSU and just really coming to love Mr. Green. And then I got to Riverside and was like, okay, I at least have the wherewithal to find who is best for me. I can't expect everyone here to be good for me, but I've now got better tools after high school to be able to like navigate BSC and figure out who I want to, who can I trust and who can I collaborate with and things of that nature. And so it's very much a letdown to sort of see how unchecked Greek life on campus in the Black community was. So, I would definitely define my first year as being heavily just a lot of stalking and a lot of harassment from these different frats. And it was just in a similar way of like, you go to these Black events where it's like Black excellence. And this is like 2017, 2018. So it's like we're the height of Black excellence in this whole concept. And these are the guys that are like president of BSC and they're student employees and they have these positions of power in BSC as well as being in these frats and holding all these parties and all this. And so it's like after 7 p.m., there are these demons. And then during the daytime, there's supposed to be people that are leading you. And you go into BSC, which is an incredibly small space on campus. And you can look around the room and be like, okay, you're an abuser. You beat your girlfriend. You raped so-and-so. You did this. My first year, there was like more of a molestation sort of sexual assault experience that I had with one of these guys. And I went into the clinic and I asked for just sleeping pills. And I was like, I'm not here to make a report or anything like that. I just want to like maybe about 3 weeks later, I'm just seeing that I can't sleep and I need some sort of assistance with that. And she was like, stop. No, I'm going to call the police. They're going to come. You have to tell them now. It's not an option. I don't care. And I was like, okay. So then that's not really what I wanted, but I was like, there's nothing to do now. And I guess I didn't fully understand how, like, it doesn't matter. The moment you even put the word out there, they just got to call the people. So I'm telling this guy, this is a Black man. He's with Riverside Police over UCPD, I think. And he's like, but as soon as I mentioned one guy, and he's like, oh, I know all of them. I know them all. I know them all by first name. Don't even worry about it. I know them all. They all have at least 6 or 7 allegations against them individually. And he like, this guy, that guy, this guy, named them all by first name. And I was like, yeah, I was here to talk about one guy, but I've had issues with all of them. But, I'm glad you know about them. That's great. And I was like, so what? He was like, well, there's no evidence. There's no witnesses. And this was quite a while ago. So, the most I can do is go down there and give him a good talking to. And I was like, a good talking to? You think that's going to help? Like, these guys have positions of power. It's being enabled from within the organization. Like, okay. And then my second year, I ended up dating these 2 guys. And the first guy, which is partly talked about in Mom's Boy, he, after the assault, he literally ran to my bathroom, starts trying to like throw up actually. And then he gets back in the bed essentially, and he's talking to me. I'm not really saying much, but he's just telling me about, I was molested as a kid, and I assaulted someone when I was in high school, and I went to found God, and I trying to fix this out of me, and I tried to cure myself, and it kind of turned into the situation of now we're back focusing on you again, and like what's happened to you, and that's those things are true, and that's very sad to hear. But I like this isn't really about you now. I've now been victimized by you as well, and this is actually an intimate partner situation. It's a guy that I truly am dating. We are boyfriend and girlfriend. And so, there's, like you said, there's this like, he's like, I never really meant to hurt you though. You're definitely one of the best people I've ever been with. I still need you and this. And then when I didn't go for that, he starts turning it into the, well, you owed me, and, I'm your boyfriend, so you can't just deny me of my right to sex and all this stuff. And so there's this like, I swear I love you. And I love women, and then you abuse me and then you blame me for it, and you're just really unhealed, really. There's a boy in there that is like freaking out and doesn't know what to do, that didn't learn anything about consent, but also was molested as a child as well. And so there's this actually very negative, connection and experience with consent. And it was hard because, a lot with like Megan Stallion and all these kind of situations in the public, but with many women and many Black women, there's this desire to protect from the police. That was another thing when she brought the police in. It wasn't just that it was like, oh, I gotta go recount this to police officers who don't already have a good reputation in this country. But on top of it, I was like, well, I didn't say I was ready to like give his name out. I mean, this is a young Black man. I'm just not sure what I want to do yet. I just want to know that I want to go sleep. Go sleep and do my homework. That's all I really want at the moment. But with the situation, now I'm in this position of like, what do I do? His father went to jail for multiple murders. His mother was in jail for gangbanging most of his life. His brother's serving life in prison for murder. There's like, I'm like, feel responsible to protect him from ending up in the same kind of cycle. And, but there's this lack of support for me at the same time. And then the second guy that's also mentioned in Mama's Boy, he, this is someone I had a slightly, I wouldn't call it that, but, the one thing was like, he had a lot of trauma himself with like the police and being arrested. I mean, I think he'd been arrested like in the double digits. At the time he was like 18, just from stop and frisk and growing up in South Central LA and Crenshaw. Like the kids are just, picked off and targeted even when you're not doing anything. And so,
growing up while Black.
Growing up while Black. Yeah. There was this like consistent, like a violation and just sort of, I was very much like a fix. There was this need to like constantly be separated from like responsibility, and just like anytime any sort of feeling that came over him that he didn't want to have. I mean, granted, I was very young, so it isn't an older woman myself now. I totally approached dating and relationships and connection very differently. But at the time I was like, okay, wow, like there's anytime he feels anything good or bad, like it's time to take my clothes off. Like the addiction was extreme. It was difficult. He wanted me to have so much compassion and understanding for that, and how overwhelming and blah, 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 blah. And, my grandma died and all of that. How sometimes young men try to find all of these reasons why their behavior is okay when that's still not okay. But then it was like, we would be out and he would be afraid of living off the police, or like, okay, so the police over there, or whatever, we gotta get out of here, whatever. And I was like it would be long. And I know that it's trauma, but it was like, nah, like I was an enemy all of a sudden, just because I was trying to I was like, you still have to calm down. Like you're just going to bring more attention by like opening the car. Like it was like his trauma was like not well managed at all, as far as like trauma responses go. And it's like, you can have trauma responses, but they can put you in more danger as well. So it is a responsibility to work on that. But ultimately, when you're in a relationship, you're spending time with someone as much as we were spending time in this more of a situationship. But I was like, this is something that obviously you need support with. But I'm like, it's hard for me to support you when I don't receive the same support. I expend so much of my energy taking care of you, and like you doing this thing where it's like you're crawling back into my womb, like you literally need a mommy figure out of me. And then there's very little compassion to take care of yourself for the sake of the people, for you and the people in your life.
Yeah, and you don't need to be someone's proxy for pain. That's not fair either. It is tricky because the hurt people, right? We all know that. But there's also choices to be made. You get to choose how you take that pain and what you do with it.
My friends and I, my Black female friends and I, we talk a lot about like, I look at a lot of my friends that have Black brothers, and it's, it's hard to see so many of my young Black women who's like their main enemies is like their fathers and their brothers, and these people are consistently their downfall, like setting them up to be in very dangerous situations, whether it's like intentional or just like, I have a friend that's like, a lot of times I wake up, my brothers are coming into the house at like 4 a.m. because they're smoking, because they're just coming back from so-and-so and they're leaving the door unlocked. And people can just come in and out of our home. And there's just this like obliviousness to the needs of women in their life. And it's like, should I catch her sometimes just trying to, but they didn't do this and they didn't do that. And, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but they're also relying on you to carry the family emotionally, financially, physically, like you're doing everything. And they get to lay around in their depression and not do anything, get to lay around in their post-traumatic stress and not take care of themselves and put everyone else in compromising positions. And so it's less of trying to get out of my place of anger, my place of rage, and feeling betrayed by Black men. And that's like a generational take on for Black women, from the beginning, especially after Reconstruction and civil rights and stuff, or Jim Crow era, where Black men were finding ways to have more privilege and more going out in the world, and we were still being fairly, neglected or like kept within the home and then suffering a lot of abuse there. And like not any real systematic community-wide like acknowledgement of that. And I know that we're moving into this era now where it's a lot of young men, they're like, well, y'all abuse us and y'all are toxic as well too. And it's like, okay, but we've got an entire society that is, protecting the needs and wants of men, even when it at the cost of everyone else. And so it's very that's very avoidant of you. It's very privileged avoidant of you to be able to think that we can just move on after. Black liberation is going to take everyone's input and everyone's, pulling their weight. And so to not acknowledge the impact of slavery on Black women and everything after that. So I know that's not, when we have these painful experiences, it can make it hard to pull things apart and separate, grief and rage and anger, and have sort of like logical kind of dipping your toes into sort of logical, processes of restoration, because we're maybe a little bit too swallowed by anger and by grief. But nonetheless, I think just writing the poems themselves is an opportunity to sort of, I shared Mama's Boy at a poetry reading competition. There's like prize money involved, and I would say that the experience was, it was interesting. You're like, okay, it was a raffle sort of situation. I couldn't decide who, like, it wasn't up to me who I was behind, like on the preceding end of, and who I was going, who would be after me. So it was like, we had this massive concert thing. These people brought their instruments on, singing and killing it. And then I went on, like I read in Mama's Boy, and there were a lot of men in the audience. And so it had an interesting reaction in the moment. And I think people, like you said, they could see the power of my words and my skill there, but it was a bit much to hear the content. That's for a lot of reasons. Like even the book, I start with a content warning, because a lot of times, especially, you hear these kind of poems and you don't even realize that this is something you've been through. I really look forward to the second version of the book. There's an opportunity to expand the thoughts that are already in the one that exists as is, and to add more into the narrative in general. And early separation needs way more research and way more programs and support around. It's not something to be taken lightly at all.
Tell people how they might find you in the book and keep up with your progress.
For now, you can find me on Instagram at kamani.j. That's KENAN 3 I's III.J, lowercase j or J. So I'm on Instagram. I have a link in my bio that will take you to Linktree. It has a listing for the book on the distributor's website, spdbooks.org, small press distribution. And also on Amazon, you can just open Amazon normally, type in Jessica Hairston or Power of Our Wombs, and it'll come up. It might take an extra day or two. They'll just be having it mailed from the distributor for you, but it's definitely findable on Amazon. And then on my Instagram page, I'll make announcements about poetry readings. I'll make announcements about virtual readings. If you're out of state, I'm currently located in California in the Bay Area. So if you're local, do keep up with me on Instagram and, come find me out in the world reading and doing things like that. The second edition of the book comes out. It'll be out on Amazon, though. I won't have a publisher for this outside of Amazon. My website will be under the name jhairstonwrites.com.
I'll put links for everything on Hey Human Podcast too. And please keep me updated on everything. I think you're an incredible talent, and just really your poetry spoke to me so deeply. Generationally, it spoke to me. Absolutely. So I really appreciate your time and your honesty and openness. And
thank you.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks. Bye.